So Maggie, what's your last name so I can say it correctly?
Kimberl.
Kimberl.
Mm-hmm.
Kimberl. Like a barrel of bourbon, but Kim in front of it, right?
Well, not barrel, but Kimberl.
Kimberl.
Southern.
Okay.
Barrel.
Okay. We'll say it like I'm from Bardstown, right? Kimberl.
Right. Don't pronounce your vowels. We don't.
Bringing to you the best stories from icons in the bourbon industry, it's Bourbon Pursuit. Now here are your hosts, Ryan and Kenny.
We're back with another episode of the Bourbon Pursuit. Oh man, I just screwed that one up pretty bad.
That's good for the bloopers.
And we're back with another episode of the Bourbon Pursuit podcast. My name is Kenny, and as always, I'm here with my co-host Ryan. Ryan, how's it going today, buddy?
Good, man. Spring is here finally, and getting to enjoy some nice weather. I'm excited for our talk today. Talk to Maggie. Growing up in Bardstown, drinking bourbon was almost like my old man grandpa's, kind of drink and a men's drink. So I'm kind of interested to talk to her and get, the women's side of the bourbon industry and everything.
Yeah, it's definitely been something that it's been more of a custom as of late that. I guess I could say that we've talked to a lot of guests in the past, and a lot of the guests so far have talked about how bourbon has always been that, not even bourbon, maybe it's even rye too, that if you're drinking bourbon or you're drinking rye, you already have one foot in the grave, and the other foot's about to follow very soon, yeah. Right? And the thing is that it's such a changing dynamic right now that it's switching around. Now you've got 20 and 30-year-olds drinking it like ourselves.
Yep.
But not only that, you've got women drinking it as well.
Yeah.
So we're definitely very honored and glad to have today on the podcast we've got Maggie Kimberl, right?
You got it right.
All right, I said it right. And so we were going beforehand. I was like, is it like barrel with a burl? But yeah. But now we got it.
It always throws me off when people get my name right on the first try because I'm not used to that.
So good. So Kim, we have you on, or Maggie. All right, sorry.
I get
Kim
that
now.
a lot too.
You just say Kim. I figured. I was like, I'm mixing it up now. So Maggie. Let's get your story. So how'd you get into bourbon in the first place?
Yeah, what was like your first bottle or like got you in that,
Well, being from Kentucky, I don't really have a memory of what my first bourbon was or anything like that. Bourbon's just kind of part of our culture and our heritage here. And so, I was always kind of a casual, yeah, you got bourbon? Sure, I'll drink it, whatever. But really what happened for me was my transition back into the workforce after staying home with kids. I was a stay-at-home mom for 3 years with my two boys. And my transition back in the workforce was actually working at a liquor store. And so we had all kinds of, Master Distiller tastings and bottle signings and all that kind of stuff. And this is actually one of my favorite stories to tell because it really speaks to the uniqueness of the bourbon industry. We had a tasting one night. Jim Rutledge from Four Roses was in our store, and it was Derby week. It was crazy busy. I kept trying to make my way over to the table to do the tasting because, I always like to do the tastings and talk to the people.
Was it like a first date? You're like trying to like sneak up to them?
No,
like,
well,
hey,
no.
Jim, how's it going?
No, it's one of those things, like even people who work in the liquor store have continuing education opportunities, and you're trying to better yourself and get better at your job and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of more of that along that line. But it was so busy, I didn't make it over to the table. And then he was packing up and he was getting ready to go, and I had to go on break. And I was like, oh, well, bummer. I didn't get to do the tasting. I really wanted to try that Four Roses stuff. And so I went back in the break room and I sat down, started eating my lunch. And the next thing I know, Jim Rutledge comes through the door with bottles in one hand and cups in the other hand and sits down and he goes, you didn't get to do my tasting. And I was like, no, I didn't. And so he sits down, he starts pouring me shots of bourbon and teaching me how to do like the proper tasting technique and all that kind of stuff. And so, I like to tell people that wasn't my first experience with bourbon, but that was the moment when I started caring about bourbon.
It's that aha moment, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And, the people in the bourbon industry are really passionate about what they do. And Jim Rutledge taking the time out to spend with somebody who works in a liquor store to sit down and be like, hey, I have this product and I'd like you to try it. That's what makes the bourbon industry unique because the people have so much passion about it.
So if you worked in a liquor store, I guess, do you kind of see maybe the distillers and all, the master distillers actually coming to liquor stores kind of like maybe dying off a little bit as bourbon's kind of growing, to think that like, well, maybe we don't have to do these things anymore?
I don't see that at all in the bourbon industry. And obviously, you know, I haven't worked in the liquor store for a couple of years now. But I still, you know, I'm still very aware. What I do in my writing, I write the bourbon news for Louisville.com.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that job too. Let's back up a little bit.
That's mainly why we're talking right now. So, you know, I really keep on top of what's going on in the bourbon Louisville world specifically, you know, and I pay attention to things that are going on elsewhere, you know, even in other countries and other states and all that kind of stuff. But mostly I'm all about Louisville bourbon culture. And so there's still a lot of times when they'll do tastings, or Master Distillers will stop by. You know, Westport Whiskey and Wine has one coming up in a few weeks. They do them at Cox's where I worked, you know, usually around Derby week. That's one of the things that I think is really interesting about the bourbon industry. The people are really passionate about it, and I don't see it dying off anytime soon. You know, I go to events multiple times every month, you know, maybe 2, 3, 4 times a week, sometimes even during really busy weeks. And there are always Master Distillers there. There are always brand ambassadors there. You know, I walk into Haymarket and I'll see people that I know. I'll walk into Bourbon's Bistro and I see people I know. So, you know, it's the people in the industry are passionate enough that I don't think they're going to stop showing up.
Yeah, and they're very accommodating. Just from the working and or developing this podcast, you know, reaching out to people. I thought this was going to be really tough, but they're like, we want to talk.
They want to talk to you. They want to accommodate you. They understand that there's this thirst for knowledge right now, and they're very willing to be forthcoming and to share that.
So, if you're dealing a lot with bourbon culture in Louisville, how have you seen the growth, if you could say, of your article since when you first started it up until now? Or maybe not article, but I don't know how you say it.
There's
following, I guess.
Yeah, I guess you're following.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I've really only been doing the bourbon news for Louisville.com for maybe about a year and a half. So, relatively speaking, I haven't been doing it that long.
Put it this way, it's longer than our podcast, so you're beating us, right?
That's certainly true. But, yeah, it seems like people were very... people really wanted the information, and there weren't a whole lot of people giving the information out. So I kind of saw it as an opportunity to fill a need. So there are people who do bourbon blogs, and there are people who write bourbon news for newspapers and stuff like that. But at the time that I started, there was nobody who was dedicated exclusively to telling people what was going on in the Louisville bourbon culture. And so I kind of saw that as an opportunity to get in there and find a way to get this news to people, because bourbon is really important for our economy right now.
Absolutely.
It's very, very big.
We had coal, we had tobacco. Those things are kind of going away a little bit, and distilling is actually our biggest industry in the state of Kentucky right now. And the culture that comes along with it is a lot more fun than the coal culture.
I would think so.
It's much more to celebrate.
Absolutely.
Or easier to celebrate.
So, you know, I was fulfilling a need that people had, because people want to go to events, and people still to this day are like, hey, what's going on this week? And, you know, I don't approach it that way. I kind of go, you know, on a week-by-week basis. I know what's going on. But if you ask me what's going on in 3 weeks, I haven't gotten to that yet, because there's just so much going on, I can't.
It almost feels like how the Prince concerts came on, right? It's like,
yes,
it's like
exactly.
Everything's like, it's like, we'll tell you on Monday what's happening by Friday and Saturday, right? It's like we don't know what's happening a month from now, because it's very volatile. Because it's still a very small business, right? It's nothing that people can plan out months in advance.
Exactly. Well, and there are certain events, you know, like the Bourbon Classic is a really great event. They plan that out, you know, a year in advance, and they were barely over capacity this year for the event space, which is just fascinating and fabulous for their third year. They put on a really great event, you know, and there are all kinds of events that go on that are huge major events, the Kentucky Bourbon Festival and the Bourbon Affair and all that kind of stuff. And those are the big events that are planned way out in advance. But then, you know, the other smaller events like the Master Distiller tastings, those are still planned, you know, a month in advance. They might not announce it.
Or advertise it very well. And that's kind of where I come in, because I'm going to all these websites and all these social media sites and saying, what's going on here? What's going on here? And then, you know, people need to know about this, and kind of getting it out there. So there's definitely a need. People want to go to these events, and they just need a way
find them.
Yeah, I think just in this day and age, I think with Twitter and everything, we're just all starving for content. Like
Yes.
we're always refreshing our feeds, looking for. And the thing about the bourbon industry, we're always looking for release. We're always looking for new information. If we can get on top of it, it makes us feel like important or connected to the brand even more.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things that you see with doing what I do. And I should mention I do this part-time, so that's kind of why another reason why I'm not always 100%. Yeah, I mean, we're all doing this as a passion because we love bourbon and we love Kentucky and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that you see is this mad rush to be the first person to publish. And, I try not to fall into that trap too much because I feel like most of the stuff that I cover is I'm going to be one of the only people covering it anyway.
Right.
But, when something big happens, there's always this mad dash to be the first person to break the news.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I found out about some Elijah Craig barrel proof being released, and I was like, ooh, I want to be the first one to tell about it.
Yeah, I didn't manage to find any of that, but
it was tough.
Yeah, I'm also not a bottle chaser. One of the things that I kind of have a little bit, not disdain, but kind of distaste for bottle chasers because working at the liquor store for
You'd
3
hate
years.
Us then.
Oh yeah.
Well,
because the word pursuit really kind of gives away, right?
Well, one of the things that happens a lot is, people, as soon as they get into bourbon, the first thing they do is they walk into the liquor store and they say, "Do you have any Pappy?" Uh-huh. And I'm like,
"Sure, absolutely, yeah, it's on the shelf. Go find it."
I know, right? I'm looking around, going, It's March. Why would we have Pappy right now? So it's like there's
it's 20% off.
Well,
can you
and the
that?
thing is, my argument was always there are so many bottles of bourbon on the shelf right now that are fabulous. There is no need to go chasing something special because every bottle of bourbon on the shelf is special.
Yeah, and you were talking about beforehand about the bottle and bonds,
yes.
the serious bourbon drinkers realize that you get really good value there.
You get really excited about the special releases, and I would have loved to get the Elijah Craig barrel proof. I love barrel proof offerings. I'm really excited about any new barrel proof that comes out, and I'm excited to try them. Booker's is one of my favorites. The only bottle that I've ever pursued store to store, though, I will tell you this, is the 25th anniversary Booker's.
Oh, nice.
And I did finally get a bottle of that, but that's the only one that I thought was worthy of the pursuit of my time.
So you're not going to chase down any Southern Wine Spirits trucks?
No. And people do that. Like when I worked at the liquor store, we had to have security sitting on the trucks when they would deliver Pappy because people would try to steal out of the back of the truck.
I know a few crazy guys like that.
I don't know what you're talking about, but it is what it is.
Those weirdos.
But yeah, once you get past that, and we're very fortunate here in Kentucky. We have access to a lot of really great bourbon. But once you get past that, like, ooh, new, ooh, special, ooh, yeah. If you just want an everyday drinker, you go for the bottled and bond. That's what the people in the know drink.
Right.
My favorite bottled and bond is JTS Brown. It's a Heaven Hill product, and I just really like the history behind the label. I think it's a neat story.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the history behind it. So with a bottled and bond, I mean, it's always gonna be 100 proof.
Yes.
It's guaranteed. Basically by the government, somewhat. I don't know. We could put quotation marks around it.
It's probably less guaranteed by the government these days. But that was one of the first Consumer Protection Acts. So before you had any sort of food or consumer protection, they passed laws to protect bourbon because there were some rectifiers who were mixing some not so great things into your bourbon: battery acid, iodine, prune juice, tobacco juice, whatever they could get their hands on to make it
gives
look
it
and
a nice
taste right.
caramel color.
Exactly.
Not that flavor,
little
but that
battery
color.
acid for the burn.
Yeah.
But
brings me home.
So that was one of the first consumer protections, was the Bottled and Bond Act. So it guarantees basically that your bourbon was made in the same distillery in the same season. It's aged at least 4 years. It can be, something like Henry McKenna Bottled and Bond is 10 years, which is, I think, more rare than the 4-year Bottled and Bond. It's 100 proof, all made in the same distillery. And I don't know if I covered all of the points. I was just kind of shooting from the hip on that one.
That was close enough. I think we got a pretty good.
So, Bottled and Bond is, I think it was seen as kind of a value brand for a long time, but it is a really good value. You know, you get a bottled and bond. My JTS Brown, I think, is $14 for a 750, and then it goes up to like Old Granddad bottled and bond, which I think is maybe around $20, $22.
And that's one of the things that, I mean, even if it's bottled and bond, so you're already getting 100 proof, which is sometimes it's already maybe 10 and or 20 proof above some of the bourbons that people are chasing for.
Yep.
I mean, that's the crazy thing. Is that you're
getting more bang for your buck.
Well, you say bang for your buck. I don't know. You kind of go back to that old Saturday Night Live sketch that said, what was it? Uncle Jemima's Pure Mash Liquor.
Oh, no.
I don't know if you ever saw it.
I don't think I saw that.
He said he's like, it's 140 proof. He goes, well, what's that mean? That means you get bit for less money.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you know, I mean, if you're really going for the high proofs, you got to go for the barrel proofs. But, you know, I think 100 proof is a good standard to start with.
No, I think it's very good, especially for those, you know, we've always talked about the coming of age drinkers, right? How we all kind of started mixing, and then you drink it on the rocks, and then you kind of, or you mix it a little bit less, and then you kind of start getting rid of the rocks, or maybe one ice cube, and then you start drinking it straight. And then that's exactly the point where you start saying, okay, well, we'll step it up in proof. Yeah. Maybe we'll do bottle and bond.
Yeah. And
then eventually you'll make yourself way to barrel proof, and then once that heartburn goes away, you're ready to start taking it on big boy style.
It's called the Kentucky Hug.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about some other like articles that you write for Louisville.com. So do you cover events? Do you cover any other thing? I mean, I guess you really don't want to go for releases, right? Because releases are... There's plenty of blogs out there.
Well, I do sometimes. It just really depends on what's going on. You know, if it's kind of a slow bourbon news week and I get a press release about something came out, I'll definitely write that up. But there's enough going on most times. You know, Louisville.com is mostly about what to do in Louisville. So I mostly cover events. You know, I go to a lot of Whiskey Chicks events. They're doing a great new tasting series now about world whiskeys. So we did one last week that was Scotch and Irish whiskey, which was fabulous because I didn't really have much experience with those things. Then you've got all the Filson, Bourbon Academy, Bourbon Salon. You know, all the Filson stuff is fabulous. You know, of course, I was covering the Bourbon Classic. This was my second year covering the Bourbon Classic, which was awesome. If you haven't been, I highly recommend that event. You know, so yeah, I mostly cover all these great events that are going on in Louisville, and sometimes I'll go and do a distillery visit and you know, write a review of a distillery or something like that. And then also I do, you know, top 10 cocktails for New Year's Eve.
I bet you those have to be the biggest hits things. Anything that says like top 10 of anything, right?
That's what we refer to as clickbait. And you know,
you have to have
you have to have stuff like that because, you know, that's kind of what gets people interested when they're not really interested in bourbon and you're trying to get them interested in bourbon. You do something like that and then they go, oh yeah, bourbon's pretty cool, you know, and so it kind of draws them in a little bit. And then, you know, like I had one last week, which was a travel itinerary if you're going to visit bourbon country for the weekend. And, you know, the way that I came up with the idea for that was people tweet me all the time, hey, I'm coming to bourbon country, anything I need to see. And I always say, DM me your email address and I will send you a list. And I will literally send people pages of links and go here and do this. And if you like this, you have to check this. And
Copy,
they're just like,
paste.
Well, you know, and that was kind of the aha moment. I was like, you know what? I just need to write an article so I can just send people a link to the article and then it's all right there. So that's, you know, there's a lot of variation in what I write, but it's mostly about what to do.
Well, let's talk about that what to do. So I guess if somebody wants to come into Louisville and they want to get the bourbon experience and they want the Maggie K
stamp of approval,
thumbs up, whatever it is.
Top 10 things to do in Louisville for bourbon drinkers.
What would you recommend? I guess let's talk.
So the itinerary that I put together in my post last week was basically, so for starters, you want to stay at one of the major bourbon hotels. So I didn't put the East End. There's the Marriott East out here. That is the only bourbon themed hotel. It's a fabulous place. They have a fabulous kitchen. But if you're coming in from out of town, you kind of don't want to drive all the way from the East End to downtown. So that's kind of why I omitted that one. But it is a really neat place to stay if you're going to do the rest of bourbon country. If you want to get the Louisville bourbon experience, you want to stay at the Seelbach, at the Brown, at 21C, one of those great places that we have downtown. Another tip that I like to give people is mint julep tours. I love mint julep tours. They have a lot of different tours that you can take. You can make up your own. And it's really nice to have a bus.
A sober driver.
Well, and that's something that I think people don't understand. It's not like visiting Napa Valley and going to all the wineries.
There's
where
not
they're
winery
right
one
next
after
to each
another.
Yeah.
You're traveling like
There's a lot
miles.
of travel time, and there's a lot of restriction on what you're able to drink at the places. So you're not going to get completely hammered doing distillery tours for a day. You could if you worked at it, and that's, I've got tips for that if you want to tweet me, but,
you can share them if you want. You can share them.
but yeah, I love mint julep tours because I think it's a lot more fun and you want to have a group together when you do something like that. If it's just two people, there's no reason to get on a bus. Just get in your car and drive around. It's cool. You're going to be fine,
Yeah, exactly.
But mint julep tours, if you have a group of 4, 6, 8, even more than that, 20 people, they can accommodate a lot of different sizes of groups. And it's nice to be able to enjoy the scenery and enjoy each other's company. And, you can get up and move around the bus and, I don't want to sit next to Kenny anymore. I'm going to go sit over here,
I smell sometimes. I
understand. So it's nice to have those options. And they do a really great job. The tour bus drivers, Larry is one of my favorite human beings on earth. So mint julep tours, if you want to, really do it upright. Otherwise, it's perfectly doable to drive, a couple, 2 or 3 distilleries in a day if you do the right areas. So what I recommend is a day of distillery tours out in the state, and then a day in Louisville where you're doing the Urban Bourbon Trail. So we've got I think 36 restaurants and bars on the Urban Bourbon Trail now, and you can get a passport.
That's definitely stepped up from I think the 10 it was a few years ago when I remember doing it.
10 when it started out. They're up to I think 36 now, 36, 37 now. And I think you only have to have 6 stamps in your passport to get a T-shirt.
Well, that's good because I would think if you needed to have 36 drinks, that's going to be quite a long day.
That's a big bar tab for a T-shirt.
Yeah. Well, but it's nice to have those options that you can go a lot of different places on the Urban Bourbon Trail, and you can tailor it to the fanciest, most gourmet places. Or the kind of dive bars, which is kind of where you're going to find me, like Haymarket.
What other kind of? A lot of people know about Haymarket already. Do you know any kind of other dive bars or any kind of very good bourbon bars that maybe a lot of people can't Google about?
Well, that would probably be some of the places that are not on the Urban Bourbon Trail because, obviously those are already, they've made their names for themselves. I like Haymarket a lot, and, I think that Matt does a fabulous job. But I also like Match Cigar Bar across the river in Jeffersonville. I also like to smoke cigars sometimes with my bourbon.
Man, alive.
And so
what a catch over here, right?
Exactly.
They have a really their bartender is a really great guy named Jinx, and he makes some great cocktails. They've got a great bourbon selection.
Yeah, I heard they have a really good old fashioned.
Yeah. Yes. I've had Jinx's Old Fashioned, and it is fabulous. So that's a spot that's not on the Urban Bourbon Trail that I happen to like a whole lot. I'm trying to think where else. Oh, well, the tasting room at Westport Whiskey and Wine is a hidden gem out here in the East End.
It really is.
They have a liquor. You can go in and get a drink, and he has probably, 50 to 100 bottles. I only see the ones that are on the shelf. I assume he has more somewhere else. But
you would think so.
He's got bottles upon bottles and he's got everything from, the awful stuff that you don't even want to drink to the really great stuff that you can't get anywhere else. So that's a nice little hidden gem. Then there's Taste on Frankfurt.
Taste Fine Wine and Spirits.
Taste Fine Wine and Spirits. You can go in there and have what they call a lady pour, which I'm not super crazy about.
I don't know about that.
But there are lots of little hidden gems all over Louisville. Lots of places where you can get great bourbon. And one of the things that I like that we're doing as a community now is we're starting to educate the people on the front lines who are selling the whiskey. So they know if you walk into any place in Louisville, there's going to be somebody there. You know, within the next few years, there's going to be somebody there, anywhere you go in Louisville, who knows about bourbon. And there's already, you know, most places you walk in, especially urban bourbon trail places, you're going to find somebody who knows about bourbon. But we're getting to the point now where it needs to be everybody.
I definitely see that as we're growing. A lot of the demand's growing as well, right? I mean, you can't get away from that. But, you know, as demand's growing, people are coming here and they expect that.
Yes.
They definitely expect that when they come to a bar and they say, like, maybe not give me your finest bourbon on the menu, because finest is, of course, we said earlier.
Very subjective. Yes.
Right? I could like Heaven Hill White Label and you could like Pappy Van Winkle. It really doesn't matter, right? But
if I own the bar, I'm going to tell you Pappy because it's about $30 a shot.
Whatever has the best markup is the best.
Exactly. Can't get away from that. All right, so we're coming to the top a little bit, but I kind of want to talk about a little bit about the women in whiskey program. You kind of talked about it earlier. You kind of gave them a jab at the whiskey or the lady whiskey shots,
lady pours,
a little bit earlier. So let's talk about what it is to be a woman in this world where now women are really starting to get into it.
You know, I think it's more of a perception thing, honestly, for at least from where I'm sitting. Because when I worked at the liquor store, it was a liquor store smoke shop, so I sold cigars as well, and it was all run by women and staffed by women. You know, we had men working there, but the women who were in charge and the women who were doing the frontline work, they were women, obviously.
Go figure, right?
But so, it's kind of strange to me to hear people say, oh, women doing these things, it's all brand new. I'm like, what?
Where have you been?
And I think that's kind of one of the arguments that Fred Minnick set forth in Whiskey Women, his book about, women have been heavily involved in distilling from the beginning of time. Women made the beer, women ran the stills, women, there were women who owned Scotch distilleries and Irish whiskey distilleries, 100 plus years ago. And so, I think probably at least a little bit of it is a fairly recent social construct. There were women who were working in bourbon distilleries, but, one of the women that Fred Minnick talks about a lot is a woman who worked at Bro and Graham, I believe, and she was on track to be a master distiller, and she couldn't be a master distiller because women were not allowed to wear pants, and the floors were slatted steel, and they were afraid people were going to be looking up her skirt when she was climbing up the stairs.
I guess capris weren't in style back then.
Capris were not in style back then, unfortunately. So, I think that women have always been present in the whiskey industry, just maybe not... They weren't at the forefront. They maybe weren't advertising it as much. But now we live in an age where, we've got, Marianne Barnes is going to be running her own distillery here pretty soon. She was in line to take over from Chris Morris, and she actually left to go to a different distillery. Was it
Old Taylor?
Old Taylor,
yeah,
that's
Taylor.
Right. You've got the people over at Michter's, Pam Heilman and Andrea Wilson. They're really, they're running the show for the most part over there at Michter's as far as the distilling and the marketing go. There are a lot of women in very prominent positions in the whiskey industry.
Diageo too, right? Is there someone at a woman that runs Diageo for the bourbon? I could be wrong. I thought it was on the tails of the still.
Andrea Wilson was at Diageo.
Okay.
And then she moved over to Michter's.
Gotcha. Okay.
There may be somebody else, and I'm just not, keeping up with, who's going where, because there's so much, there's so much going on in bourbon. It's hard to keep it all straight. But, there are a lot of prominent women in very high up positions in the bourbon industry. And it's also becoming more common for women to be whiskey drinkers. And I also, this is another area where I'm like, I think it's mostly perception and a social construct that women were not drinking whiskey before. there were definitely women drinking. Maybe their husbands were buying it and they were, maybe not openly drinking it, but I truly believe that women have always been drinking whiskey as long as whiskey's been around. Especially, when whiskey was medicine, everybody, even the kids were drinking it probably, but it's definitely a lot more open now and a lot less shocking now, I would say.
Right.
Yeah, I think there might be a gap too, because I know my grandmother, they would always drink highballs, but like my mother and that they're
a lot of
vodka
plastic.
only, beers, nothing, no whiskey. But now, as in our social setting, my wife hasn't jumped on board yet with the bourbon, but a lot of her friends are
have her come hang out with me.
Well, she's pregnant right now, so
okay, we'll give her time.
See you in 9 months.
Yeah, see you in 9 months. But yeah, just some of her friends, I'll notice them more in old fashions or or a Manhattan, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. So
yep, I love a good Manhattan. That's when I don't want to think about it, I get a bullet rye Manhattan. I like the high rye Manhattans.
Yeah, I like ryes in cocktails myself, so that's a good choice.
Well, so we'll finish it up. If you're gonna drink bourbon, how do you drink it? On the rocks, straight? How do you do it?
It depends on the bourbon. Most of the time, I'm gonna drink it neat.
Fantastic. All right, well, Maggie, we definitely appreciate you being on the show. If somebody wants to get in contact with you to ask any kind of questions about anything, how do they do that?
The easiest way to find me is on Twitter at LouGirl502. I've also got a website, LouGirl502.com, and you can find my articles on Louisville.com. But the best way to get me is going to be on Twitter at LouGirl502.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you again for once being on the show. We definitely appreciate it. Definitely. First time, I think, first woman on the show, right? So we definitely we're breaking grounds here, right?
Shattering the glass ceiling. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Well, fantastic. Yep. So if you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on iTunes. If you want to follow us, make sure you do so on Instagram and Twitter at Bourbon Pursuit.
Yeah, any feedback, suggestion, comments, just let us know how we're doing. We want to get better with each show, so we appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.